Welcome back to Salud al Día, the space where we tackle the topics that matter most: health, humanity, and the pursuit of peace. Today, we turn our attention to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. It's a conflict that has stretched far beyond its initial expectations, leaving behind devastating consequences for millions. This episode isn't about politics, power plays, or propaganda. It's about people. It's about lives lost, lives forever changed, and the enormous medical and humanitarian cost of war. Let's start with the human toll. As of today, the Russo-Ukrainian war has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, both civilian and military. The numbers are staggering, and while exact figures remain elusive due to the fog of war and propaganda on both sides, experts estimate that close to 1 million people have either died or been seriously injured since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022. Among the civilians, tens of thousands have been killed, many in missile strikes, artillery fire and drone attacks, targeting densely populated urban centers. Behind every number is a face, a family, and a story cut short by violence. In Russia, reports suggest hundreds of thousands of soldiers have been wounded or killed, many of them young men who had their futures stolen from them before they could even begin to truly live. When we talk about the leading causes of death in this war, one thing becomes clear. Modern warfare doesn't discriminate. Explosive weapons have been the primary cause of death and severe injury. Artillery shells, missile strikes, cluster bombs and drones have left entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Cluster munitions, in particular, pose an ongoing threat, as unexploded ordnance remains scattered across farmland, schools and playgrounds, waiting for an innocent footstep to trigger catastrophe. In addition to explosive injuries, both soldiers and civilians are facing severe burns, traumatic amputations, head injuries, and perhaps most tragically, preventable deaths due to delayed or non-existent medical care. And that brings us to the medical crisis. Hospitals and clinics on both sides have been destroyed or rendered non-functional. In Ukraine, over 1,000 healthcare facilities have been damaged or decimated by missile and drone attacks. Patients with chronic conditions like diabetes, heart disease or cancer are being pushed aside in favor of trauma patients with life-threatening injuries. Medical supplies are dwindling. Antibiotics, pain medications, surgical tools, even clean water are now considered luxuries in many frontline hospitals. Rehabilitation facilities are overwhelmed with young soldiers who've lost limbs or suffered spinal injuries, many of whom will require years, if not decades, of care. Mental health is another silent epidemic emerging from this conflict. Post-traumatic stress disorder, severe anxiety, depression, and survivor's guilt are running rampant among soldiers and civilians alike. Children who've grown up in basements and bomb shelters are now showing signs of developmental and emotional delays. Mothers who've lost sons, wives who've lost husbands, and communities who've lost entire generations are being left to pick up the pieces of shattered lives without any psychological support. As we look back at 2024, this year will be remembered as one of unrelenting conflict, humanitarian despair, and fleeting glimmers of hope. Despite continued diplomatic efforts and periodic ceasefires, the war persisted. Civilians bore the brunt of heavy shelling, frontline cities remained under constant siege, and the global economy felt the ripples of rising energy costs, food shortages, and political instability. Humanitarian organizations worked tirelessly, but their efforts often felt like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. But there were also stories of resilience, stories of doctors performing surgeries in makeshift operating rooms under candlelight, stories of volunteers delivering medicine and food across dangerous terrain, stories of soldiers risking their lives not just for their country but for their comrades, and stories of ordinary people, mothers, fathers, teachers and children, refusing to let war extinguish their hope. Now, as we step into 2025, what does the future hold? Many experts predict that this war may not see a clear military victory on either side. Instead, the world could see a prolonged stalemate with neither Ukraine nor Russia able to secure a definitive end to hostilities. However, peace talks remain a flickering light on the horizon. The international community is growing increasingly vocal about the urgent need for resolution, not just for political stability, but for humanitarian relief. If the war continues through 2025, the medical needs will only grow more dire. The strain on healthcare systems will deepen, diseases will spread more easily through displaced populations, and preventable deaths from malnutrition, untreated infections, and lack of basic medical care will increase. Long-term consequences like the rise of antibiotic-resistant infections due to improper treatment protocols in war zones could become a global health crisis. But hope is not lost. Every war, no matter how devastating, must come to an end. And when it does, the true work begins. Rebuilding hospitals, restocking pharmacies, retraining healthcare workers, and addressing the deep psychological wounds left behind will require international solidarity, funding, and compassion. Every single one of us has a role to play, whether it's through donations, advocacy, or simply keeping this issue alive in conversations. This is not just a war between two nations, it's a humanitarian tragedy that impacts us all. The death toll isn't just a number, it's a global wound, and healing it requires a collective effort. Peace isn't just a word, it's an action, and it starts with us. It starts with demanding accountability from world leaders, supporting humanitarian initiatives, and refusing to let the cries of the innocent fade into silence. The war in Ukraine must end. Russia must retreat. Ukraine deserves sovereignty. But above all, the people on both sides deserve peace, dignity, and the chance to heal. War doesn't just end with treaties and handshakes. It ends when we collectively decide that every life, every breath, every moment of peace is worth fighting for. Thank you for joining me today on Salud al Día. If this conversation resonated with you, if it sparked a thought, or if it stirred your heart, please share this episode. Keep talking about this war, keep demanding peace, and above all, keep believing that a better future is possible. Stay informed, stay compassionate, and let us all remain tireless in our pursuit of peace.